Welcome back, YouTube. Today I want to talk to you about nuclear reactors. I've dug out this room under the room my water mill system used to be in, which is it's also under my MFSU over there. And we're going to place a nuclear reactor down here. I'm going to teach you how these guys work. But first, you're probably going to want to know the recipe. It's a little bit complicated. You're going to need advanced alloys, which I taught you how to make in an earlier episode. You use your compressor with bronze mixed with tin and iron, refined iron. You're also going to need some advanced circuits, some reactor chambers, which I'll show you how to make as well, and a generator. So to make your reactor chambers, you're going to need more advanced alloys. You're going to need these integrated reactor platings, which is made by placing an advanced alloy in the center and surrounding the 4 adjacent blocks on top, bottom, left, and right with copper. And you're also going to need this integrated heat dispenser and a machine block. So to make the integrated heat disperser, you use the integrated reactor plating, like so, and then you place that in the center with some coolant cells, which is made by placing your water cells in your extractor, and an advanced circuit, and even more copper. So you are going to need a lot of copper and a lot of materials in general because you need a whole bunch of advanced alloys. In addition, to make a normal reactor, the configuration is going to require a bunch of these coolant cells and a bunch of integrated heat dispersers, in addition to, of course, uranium. So that's how you make the reactor. Now, the question remains, how do you use the reactor? Well, reactors are a complicated little block. So I'm going to try to explain as best I can, and hopefully I won't leave anything out. Reactors can be turned on and off with a redstone signal. While they're receiving a redstone signal, the reactor will not power on, okay? And reactors they create power through uranium cells, okay? And you make uranium cells by compressing uranium ore, and then the resultant ingot is combined with an empty cell, and that gives you a uranium cell, okay? So you just place your uranium cell in your reactor, and your reactor will power up if it's not receiving a redstone signal, and each uranium cell will give you 10 energy units per tick, okay? And it's actually a little more complicated than that, but if you only place one in there, you'll get 10 energy units per tick, and with only one uranium cell in there, it will also generate 10 heat. Okay, now the reactor is cooled by its own hull, either one or two cooling per second. Okay, and the energy created is per tick. It's 10 energy units per tick, but the heat is per second. So you're going to get 10 heat going to the reactor hull per second. Okay, and some of that is going to be cooled by the reactor plating, which is just the block itself, and some of it is going to be cooled by air blocks around it or water blocks around it. The air blocks don't give really much cooling at all, but water blocks do give one cooling per block in an adjacent block to the center piece, which is this reactor. Okay, you can put chambers on this as well, up to 6 chambers. And those chambers will expand the inventory of the reactor, allowing you to place more uranium cells, coolant cells, reactor plating, or integrated heat dispersers. Okay, however, water tiles that surround the chambers do not count unless they are surrounding the reactor itself. Only the water tiles surrounding the reactor itself. And an adjacent tile to that, including the diagonal ones, okay, only those blocks count for cooling from water. Okay, so as I said, 10 heat per second from one uranium cell. But if you were to place a coolant cell next to that, instead of getting 10 heat going to the reactor plating, you would get 10 heat going to the coolant cell. Now, coolant cells also cool themselves 1 per second. Okay, cooling and heating is always once per second, all right? except in a special circumstance, which I'll also cover. So that is going to kill this coolant cell sooner or later because it can only cool itself 1 per second, but it's taking 10 per second of heat. Alright, so you can put a second coolant cell, and only cells adjacent, only cooling elements adjacent to your uranium cell on one of its faces will count. The 4 and a plus around it, alright? So with 2 cooling elements next to your uranium cell, instead of giving 10 heat, it will give 4 heat to this and 4 heat to this, okay? So it's giving 8 total, 4 to each coolant, alright? Now you can put a third in here, and now it will give 2 heat to each cooling element. And if you put in a fourth, it will only give 1 heat to each cooling element. And this creates a stable reactor. And the reason it's a stable reactor is because with only 1 heat going to each cooling element, and each cooling element cooling itself by 1 heat every second, they will stay undamaged throughout the cycle of the reactor. And 1 full cycle that will use up your uranium, and you'll get 2 million energy units out of 1 uranium cell. Okay, now here's where it gets complicated. Okay, if you do it in this configuration, you won't get a really efficient reactor. Okay, you could fit, without any reactor chambers in there, you could fit 2 uranium safely in here in this configuration, giving you 20 energy units per tick, which is really not very much. You're better off just building a geothermal. These reactors are very expensive, and the uranium cells get used up, and lava is much more common. But here's where things get interesting. With the uranium cells, for every uranium cell adjacent to a uranium cell, it will get another tick of heat and energy per second. Okay, so I said that this generates 10 energy units per tick, right? Well, with another uranium cell next to it right here, each of these cells, since they each have another cell next to them, will generate a second time. So it will be 20 energy units per tick. However, in addition to the 20 energy units per tick, they're also going to give off twice the heat they normally would, okay? So normally this would give 10 heat to the reactor plating with no cooling elements around it, but it's going to do that twice per second now, so that's 20 heat per uranium cell going to the reactor plating, and it'll heat up very quickly and explode, and we don't want that. It's not super fast with only 2, but it definitely adds up. So we could put coolant cells in here to reduce that significantly, but it still won't be a stable reactor. And the reason is you can't get 4 cooling elements around each because they're directly next to each other for efficiency. Okay, so instead of giving you 2 million energy, this uranium cell will give you 4 million because the health of the uranium cell isn't reduced for that second burst of energy. So now you're giving 2 heat to each of these coolant cells, okay, but you're doing it twice, so they're each getting 4, and they can only heal themselves 1. So a solution to that might be to get one of these here, okay, and this is called an integrated heat disperser, and what it can do is it can transfer heat from the cooling elements around it or from the reactor hull into all of the other cooling elements around it. So for instance, if I were to place it here, any heat going into the reactor plating and any heat, and they can also transfer heat into the reactor plating. They even out. Their job is to try to make the energy as even as possible. So if I place it here, it will take energy, it will take heat from this coolant cell because this coolant cell is getting 4 per second, right? Because it's getting 2 per second from this, and then it's getting burst again because there's just another uranium cell next to it. All right, so it will take the heat out of that, and we could put more coolants in here. Okay, and that would distribute the heat evenly. So you would have to set up this complicated network of heat dispersers and coolants and uranium cells, and you can make all kinds of different configurations. Some of them will run for a full cycle, some of them won't, and some of them will give you more energy out of your uranium cell than others. And you can get cooling from water around it, and so on and so forth. And in addition, the chambers will give you 2 cooling per second per chamber that you put on it. But today we're going to build something a little bit different. We're not going to use any of these cooling elements because there's actually another kind of cooling element that I am more interested in that I want to show you. Okay, so we're going to get all kinds of uranium here, and since we have a redstone signal going in here, I can put it all in and it will not power up. Okay. Okay, so this is the configuration I'm going to use, and the only reason I'm not putting one in this block is I want the output of this to be under 512 energy units per tick so that I can go into my MFSU without using a transformer. Okay, so the other type of cooling that I wanted to tell you about is ice. Okay, ice and water can also keep your reactor cool. And if you put ice in here, okay, the ice will be used up, and it can only use 1 per second. And the ice that is used will cool the reactor plating by 300. Okay, so that's pretty significant. And since we have equivalent exchange and ice is only worth 1 EMC, it's very easy to get a hold of a very large amount of ice. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a reactor that has a great deal of uranium, and since there's so much uranium next to each other, we're going to get a great deal of power out of this. For instance, this uranium cell, since it has itself plus 4 surrounding uranium cells, it's going to give us 50 energy units per tick. But at the same time, it's going to push 50 heat into the reactor hull. Okay, so we don't want this to explode because that's what that heat will do, so we're going to keep it cool with ice. And to do that, I'm going to set up an energy condenser. We're going to put ice in there. And we're also going to set up, let's see, let's get one more of this. Actually, that's a fuel, so I can't do that. Let's get all of this out and just take out a bunch of stuff. Okay, put our Klein star in here. We need one more glowstone dust. And let's make glowstone. And we're also going to want our collector. So we're going to put down our collector and the glowstone above it. And now we're making plenty of ice. Okay, so I'm going to grab 3 stacks of ice and put them in our reactor. And then we are going to get a filter. And we're going to place our filter against our condenser right here. And we're going to place a tube here. From my testing, going into the sides of the reactor will not work, but going from underneath will work just fine. Okay, so now we have plenty of ice in here. We're going to need a timer to get this whole thing going. So let's set up a timer right here. And as you can see, it's already pushed in another stack of ice. So let's run a cable. Okay. And before I destroy the redstone so that it starts the whole thing up, I want to show you that my MFSU is empty and it is not receiving power from my geothermals. So let's go down here and break this. And as you can see, the ice is being used. And it keeps the reactor cool. And we know that because it is not using all of the ice from every single stack, which means it doesn't need to. So if I come over here and look here, you can see that the energy is going in. There is activity. Okay, it's not 512 energy units per tick, so it's all getting used up because my mass fabricator is plugged in. But that's okay. If I wanted to stop the whole process, it would be very easy. We could just place a lever, made like so, on our MFSU, and turn that on, and then grab this, emit if full, I wonder if there's a bug in Industrial Craft that is preventing that from happening. If we change it to emit, oh, that's emit. Okay, there you go. Do not output energy. Do not output energy unless full. So that's what we want. Okay, so now this MFSU won't output any energy until it is full. And I believe, yes, if we turn the redstone signal on, that is what causes that behavior. So I've also set up this extractor up here. I actually already recorded this video once, and my entire game crashed because of a bug in the version of Industrial Craft that I was running. So I got pretty frustrated with that, and that's why there was not a video last night. But obviously I was able to salvage my world, and now I've set up a project table with these integrated heat dispersers. I was using this to build that reactor, which I had all on camera and don't anymore. But that's okay, I showed you guys the recipes and everything. As you can see, this thing runs just fine, and this is able to keep up without a problem. As you can see, it's actually not only keeping up, but it's filling. So that is how you build a very high energy one block generator, although you do need some add-ons. It's not really a huge deal, and you don't have to have your timer set on a really fast speed because it's pushing entire stacks at a time, so it doesn't really become an issue. And this will last for quite a long time, I think a little bit over 2 hours. So a little bit over 2 hours at almost 512 energy units per tick. I'd say that's pretty good. If you add some chambers onto that, you can expand this system, and the best configuration I've found consists of all uranium excepting one row which is left off because you need the bottom not to have a chamber, and then one more row that you leave empty for the ice, and then you have to, actually I believe that's the entire configuration, but I'm not going to do that for now, and I'm not certain that that's the right configuration. And as this Let's Play progresses, I do plan on making some reactor chambers. So we're going to add reactor chambers onto this guy, and you can wire right into the reactor chamber, but you cannot tube into a reactor chamber. It has to go into the reactor itself, and in our case, and as far as I know, you can only go into the bottom. I have not yet tested the top, but if you want to give it a shot, just make sure that your reactor has a redstone signal before proceeding if there's any uranium in it. So that's nuclear reactors, and I believe I've covered everything. Buckets work just like ice, except instead of the bucket getting used up, it just uses the water in the bucket, and it only cools at 250 instead of 300. There is a post in the Industrial Craft forums that covers how this all works. And the author of Industrial Craft, Al Blaka, made the post. I believe it's like how to blow up your nuker with style or something like that. So if you want, you can check that out. Nuclear reactors are my favorite part of Industrial Craft. And briefly yesterday, I thought that they had nerfed the continuously applied single-use coolant method, which is what this is. And I was pretty upset about that, so that's part of the reason I didn't re-record the episode after my crash. But it is still working. You just have to make sure that your tube is going in through the bottom. And that's pretty much it for tonight's episode. So If you like the episode and you want to give me a chat, then feel free to come visit me in the chat in my description. And as always, thank you for watching.